Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Cadell. I hope you're doing okay. I'm doing okay. Sorry, I can't. I can't keep from laughing. Sorry, it's December. Hey, we are learning about heredity, which means inheritance, which means the passing on of traits from parents to offspring. Now, we've learned about this stuff called Mendelian genetics, which is really straightforward. There's dominant, there's recessive gene. The dominant characteristic dominates over the recessive characteristic, and then that's what you see exhibited in the offspring. However, not all inheritance patterns work that way. When this guy Gregor Mendel was working with his peas, he got pretty lucky, and some say there was divine intervention that all of the genes seemed to work out for him. He didn't know any of the details behind any of it, and it all worked out for him that it was just straightforward recessive and dominance hierarchy. Today, we're going to learn about something called sex-linked inheritance. And this just means that genes that come from chromosomes that are offered by males or females exhibit their effects differently. We're in chapter 14 in the textbook, Human Heredity. Kids like this stuff because I think it's interesting. It's relevant to everyone. When you learn about the Krebs cycle, which I guess you haven't learned about yet, but when you learn about some of those biochemical pathways, it's just a cartoon on a page. But this stuff I think is cool. It's chromosomes, and if you ever have children one day, you're going to pass along your chromosomes to them too. So I think it's pretty relevant. I'm going to have you read later pages 395 through 397, answer some questions, and then answer a few questions back here, page 412. Thanks. Let's get moving. But first, we need to define this. So humans have 23 sets of chromosomes in every one of their cells. Now, there's 22 of these things called autosomes. And all that means is that they're chromosomes that dictate stuff that is important in the body. Now the sex chromosomes do that also, but not as much. They have roles in creating characteristics that have to do with sexual characteristics, like what makes a man and what makes a female. And in addition, they are the chromosomes that create the gender of the baby, meaning is the baby going to be a boy or is it going to be a girl? So when a male and a female come together here as humans, the males always offer either an X or a Y chromosome in their sperm. And that's because they were given an X and a Y. Maybe from, I guess the Y always comes from dad. The mom always can only give an X, but what the male can give is either an X or a Y. So when this individual is mating with this female in this Punnett square that you see here, the male received, I guess, an X from his mom and a Y from his dad. Now, that's what in turn it can offer the baby. And so that blocked out white spot there are the probable outcomes of this union as far as the baby's sex chromosomes are concerned. So when these come together, we know that you have to pull them down and over. So if the top two kind of sex chromosomes are offered there, the X from the male and the X from the female, you're going to get a female baby. And likewise, you could do the crossing, or the pulling down and pulling over. I think it's always interesting for kids to see that this isn't the way that there's gender determination across the animal kingdom. This works for humans and probably our primate relatives, but there are differences, and I'm going to show you a few-minute movie on it right now.
My wife is pregnant right now with our first child, and when people see her with her big baby bump, the first question people ask, almost without fail, is it a boy or is it a girl? Now, there are some assumptions behind that question that we take for granted because of our familiarity with our own human biology. For human babies, we take it for granted that there's a 50-50 chance of either answer, boy or girl. But why is it that way? Well, the answer depends on the sex determination system that has evolved for our species. You see, for most mammals, the sex of a baby is determined genetically with the XY chromosome system. Mammals have a pair of sex chromosomes, one passed down from mom and one from dad. A pair of X's gives us a girl, and an X and a Y together gives us a boy. Since females only have X's to pass on in their egg cells, and males can give either an X or a Y in their sperm cells, the sex is determined by the father, and the chance of producing a male or a female is 50-50. This system has worked well for mammals, but throughout the tree of life, we can see other systems that have worked just as well for other animals. There are other groups of animals that also have genetic sex determination, but their systems can be pretty different from ours. Birds and some reptiles have their sex genetically determined, but instead of the sex being determined by dad, their sex is determined by mom. In those groups, a pair of Z sex chromosomes produces a male. So these males only have Z's to give. However, in these animals, one Z and one W chromosome together as a pair produces a female. In this system, the chance of a male or a female is still 50-50. It just depends on whether mom puts a Z or a W into her egg. Certain groups have taken genetic sex determination in completely other directions. Ants, for example, have one of the most interesting systems for determining sex, and because of it, if you are a male ant, you do not have a father. In an ant colony, there are dramatic divisions of labor. There are soldiers that defend the colony, there are workers that collect food, clean the nest, and care for the young, and there's a queen and a small group of male reproductives. Now, the queen will mate and then store sperm from the males, and this is where the system gets really interesting. If the queen uses the stored sperm to fertilize an egg, then that egg will grow up to become female. However, if she lays an egg without fertilizing it, then that egg will still grow up to be an ant, but it will always be a male. So you see, it's impossible for male ants to have fathers. And male ants live their life like this with only one copy of every gene, much like a walking sex cell. This system is called a haplodiploid system, and we see it not only in ants, but also in other highly social insects like bees and wasps. Since our own sex is determined by genes, and we do know of these other animals that have their sex determined by genes, it's easy to assume that for all animals, the sex of their babies still must be determined by genetics. However, for some animals, the question of whether it will be a boy or a girl has nothing to do with genes at all, and it can depend on something like the weather. These are animals like alligators and most turtles. In these animals, the sex of an embryo in a developing egg is determined by the temperature. In these species, the sex of the baby is not yet determined when the egg is laid, and it remains undetermined until sometime in the middle of the overall development period when a critical time is reached. And during this time, the sex is completely determined by temperature in the nest. In painted turtles, for example, warm temperatures above the critical temperature will produce females within the eggs, and cool temperatures will produce a male. I'm not really sure who came up with this mnemonic, but you can remember that. When it comes to painted turtles, they're all hot chicks and cool dudes. For some tropical fish, the question of will it be a boy or will it be a girl isn't settled until even later in life. You see, clownfish all start out their lives as males. However, as they mature, they become female. They also spend their lives in small groups with a strict dominance hierarchy where only the most dominant male and female reproduce. And amazingly, if the dominant female in the group dies, the largest and most dominant male will then quickly become female and take her place, and all the other males will move up one rank in the hierarchy. In another very different ocean animal, the green spoonworm, the sex of the babies is determined by a completely different aspect of the environment. For this species, it is simply a matter of where a larva happens to randomly fall on the seafloor. If a larva lands on the open seafloor, then it will become a female. But if it lands on top of a female, then it will become a male. So for some species, the question of boy or girl is answered by genetics. For others, it's answered by the environment. And for others still, they don't even bother with the question at all. Take whiptail lizards, for example. For those desert lizards, the answer is easy. It's a girl. It's always a girl. They are a nearly all-female species, and although they still lay eggs, these eggs hatch out female clones of themselves. So will it be a girl or will it be a boy? Throughout the entire animal kingdom, it does really all depend on the system of sex determination. For humans, that system is a genetic XY system. And for me and my wife, we found out it's going to be a baby boy.
Yay. Isn't biology awesome? With respect to those woodtail lizards, it's interesting that they have evolved to be able to have that sex determination system where it's always a girl. It's pretty crazy that every lizard of this one species is a girl. Then they just have clones. It's a lot of plants do that, bacteria do that. Clones are good, except for one thing. When your environment changes, you're woefully underprepared as far as a variant population with tons of variability within it. Like the human species, look around, everyone's different than one another. And even inside, people are even more different than what you can see on the outside, meaning if there's all of a sudden a change in the environment, a lack of something, or ice caps melting, or whatever it may be, some are going to be better equipped to deal with the change in the environment than others. But with the whiptail lizard, they won't be able to survive at all because everyone's exactly the same, and that's not good for a species. Well, let me back up. It's great for a species because it's easier to reproduce. You don't have to look for a mate. You don't have to do all this stuff. But at the same time, it's bad if the environment changes. So the whiptail lizard environment must have been the same for a long period of time. Like we're talking millions of years down in the southwestern desert of our country. If you look here, you'll see the 23 pairs of chromosomes that you have in every one of your cells if you're a girl. Take a look down there at the bottom. You see all of those chromosomes are homologous. And we've talked about this, that the genes are the same in roughly the same spot, coding for the same characteristic, but there might be a little bit of variability there that you got from mom's chromosome 3 and dad's chromosome 3 with respect to eye color. Mom gave you the gene to create a protein to create blue eyes. Dad gave you the gene to create a protein to create brown eyes, whatever. If you look down there at the X chromosomes, it's the same, but here's where it's different. If you're a guy, you see how much shorter the Y chromosome is, and it literally is shorter. It only has, versus the female chromosome, the X chromosome, which has 1,300 genes on it and tons of genetic information. It's almost as long as a lot of those other genes that you see at the top of this karyotype, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Chromosome Y only has 73 genes, and half of those deal with maleness, like stuff down there, and stuff that makes guys guys. And of those, most of those are only turned on momentarily in your lifetime when you're still a developing embryo, guys. It's called the SRY gene. It turns on, creates a bunch of proteins, and then it turns off. And those proteins then go and create these cascades of information within the body that makes you a male, essentially. However, on the X chromosome, there's a ton of information. I'm going to put a square right here. There's a ton of information right here that deals with a lot of things that don't have to do with femaleness and maleness. There's stuff like real important stuff like eye development, blood clotting, muscle development, heart development. There's some pretty important genes here, and I'm going to show you why this is critical when it comes to the health of individuals in our population. So Frankel likes to call this Senor Stubby, and it literally is smaller. I've actually read before that sperm that create male babies or give that Y to the union of the egg and the sperm to create a baby literally swim faster than ones that have an X chromosome because they're lighter. They're like, I think there's something like, I read it's like 10% lighter or something like, they're just faster. But like guys in human life, they burn out more quickly. Girls are more steady. I don't want to go down. I don't want to get fired today. But anyway, let's keep going here and let's look at a case study here of a single characteristic that is controlled by these two chromosomes that you receive from your parents. Now let's imagine that there is a condition. There is a condition called hemophilia, and what happens is that we all have DNA that creates proteins through transcription and translation. And in some individuals, there's mutations here that lead to a misshapen protein. In someone who's a hemophiliac, which occurs, I don't know what the prevalence is, other than I know that there's about 30 to 33,000 people in America at any given time who have hemophilia. What it is that there's a mutation here. And if there's a mutation here and there's a different letter here than there once was, maybe we're not going to create the protein that allows for blood clotting as well as a normal person, let's say. This usually has to do with, it's called clotting factor 8 or clotting factor 9. What happens when you get a cut or a bruise on the inside of your body, like on your knees or something, you have a blood vessel break, and then there's this cascade of proteins, and there's at least 8 or 9 of them that come in sequence, and then they start to create like a fibrous net that will then encapsulate all these red blood cells and basically heal the blood vessel so you don't get clotting. In people with hemophilia, so that you don't get runaway blood loss. And people with hemophilia, I've heard that bruising is actually more of a risk of giving them really a bad symptom and bad trouble than actually a blood cut, a cut on your hand or something, because this blood can accumulate, and all a bruise is just a broken blood vessel, but it's underneath the intact skin, and this can accumulate in joints, maybe like in your ankle or your knees potentially, and then you can have tons of swelling and the breakdown of cartilage and ligaments and things like that, and it's obviously probably very, very painful. So let's imagine that the gene that you have for hemophilia, as far as blood clotting proteins goes, let's imagine that it's right here. And let's imagine that you're a girl, and let's imagine that you got a big H from your dad and a little h from your mom. And now this is your genetic profile. If someone was to look at your karyotype, they would say, oh, you're a girl, X and X, and here's what you have for blood clotting. Well, that's good news in the sense that you have a dominant gene here, which means it's going to be the correct sequence of letters for the blood clotting protein, and you have one that has a mutation. This little h is going to be recessive, which means, let's say, instead of what you ordinarily had, I think it was a C here, and now you have a T instead of that. The good news is that you're just a carrier, which means that you don't exhibit any of the issues of hemophilia, because this guy is going to dominate out, create the correct protein, and then that's going to give you the protection that you need going forward. Here's the problem. If you're a guy, excuse me. I think this is best if I just erase this. So if you're a guy, then you have an X and a Y, okay, no problem. And let's say that mom gives you a chromosome where this is a recessive gene. It has a sequence of letters that are not correct here, and you'll say to yourself, well, that might be okay because maybe I have an H down here that can dominate over that. But the problem is that you don't have anything here. And this is why males have more genetically caused diseases than females. It's because of the Y chromosome has no corollary here, nothing to block out any of the negative effects of a recessive gene given by a female who gave the X chromosome to the union of the baby.
Hemophilia is a rare inherited bleeding disorder in which the blood does not clot normally. Hemophiliacs do not bleed more extensively or even more quickly than other people, but they do bleed for a longer time after an injury or surgery. Bleeding may occur internally, especially in the knees, ankles, elbows, and into tissues and muscles. If left untreated, internal bleeding into joints and muscles will cause agonizing pain and severe crippling. It can be fatal when bleeding occurs in a vital organ like the brain.
Essentially, the hemophiliac's blood has little to none of a specific protein that is necessary for normal clotting. There are two types of hemophilia, A and B. People who have hemophilia A lack a protein called factor VIII, while people with hemophilia B are missing or have low levels of clotting factor IX.
Okay, so let's take a look at this picture real fast. So let's imagine that dad has hemophilia. So let's imagine what he's going to offer to the baby. He's going to offer an X chromosome with a lowercase h, and his Y chromosome just doesn't have a gene as far as clotting goes. So if he's paired with a normal mother, you can see here that since mom has a capital H, even though dad has a lowercase h, and what he gives as far as X chromosome, then all of the babies are going to be fine. The boys will be unaffected because mom gave them a capital H, and then mom gave a capital H to all of the girls. And so everything's good here. There's a carrier, which means the babies have the two females here in this union have the gene potentially to offer their offspring. There's a 50% chance that they'll give the offspring that X with that lowercase h versus the other X that they received from mom. But the boys are okay. And let's go over this. let me show you a Punnett square here of a potential union between dad and mom. And I'm going to say that neither of these individuals has hemophilia, but mom is a carrier, maybe a result of the figure that we just saw. So mom has a lowercase h and an uppercase h. So she can clot blood just fine, but she's a carrier. And dad has, let's say he's not a hemophiliac. He has an uppercase H. Now let's slide these over and down. So there's our first girl, and here's our second girl. And so you have to carry over the little h's and big h's also. So I'm going to put a big H here and a little h here, and a big H here and a big H here. So you see with the girls in this union that there is a situation where there's one carrier, but neither of them have hemophilia. Now, if you create a boy here, this X and a Y, and this is an X and a Y, and let's pull down down and over the H's here. So this one just has, all it has is a little h. And this one is going to have a big H, because remember, the Y chromosome doesn't offer anything when it comes to the sex-linked inheritance diseases or these characteristics that we're interested in this situation. So if you're a boy and you have a carrier mother and a normal father, you have a 50% chance, 1 out of 2, if you're a boy in this union here, of having hemophilia. And you can see then how, if we did this for each of the sex-linked inheritance diseases, how the boys have a greater chance of having a disease than girls. Now, a girl baby could have hemophilia here, but mom must be a carrier. And then if you can imagine a lowercase h here, then you would have X little h, X little h. But dad would have to have hemophilia in that instance. Well, I'm going to stop talking, and what I'd like you to do is go in the textbook and understand how sex-linked inheritance occurs. And there's going to be a book assignment here where you're going to read all about sex-linked inheritance. There's some questions. Go ahead and take a picture of this. When preparing for today, I looked at this picture and I was like, okay, that's awesome. And then I thought to myself, when I made this like 2 years ago, what did I type into the internet? Shirtless child with beard. I mean, I have no clue how I got this picture on here. Maybe I typed in inheritance. I have no, sorry. Cute kid. Here's another state standard that we're going to hit on in this assignment. And I'm going to read it to you. It says, explain how genetic mutations can benefit, harm, or have neutral effects on an organism. You can imagine that if there is a mutation on DNA that causes a protein to misshapen or whatever, that might have a detrimental effect on an organism. And that's what I've been explaining to you here with this gene that's passed from parents to offspring that isn't normal as far as blood clotting capability. Also, there's a situation where you can have a mutation on DNA which actually leads to the same amino acid sequence being created. And if you recall this from the first semester, maybe you learned about this, it's called wobble. And what it means is, what you can see here in this codon wheel from your textbook is that if you read it from inside to out, as far as a codon is concerned, and codons are created when mRNA is transcribed from the 3 letters here in this gene of DNA. So let me just circle this, A, T, T. So the codon in RNA would be UAA. Okay, no problem. And if you go from the middle and you go out, look at U. So I'm going up to the top right corner here. U, A. Oh yeah, of course it's stop, huh? Here's all you need to know is that it could be U, A, G, and it would code for the same thing if it was coding for an amino acid. What are the odds that I got stopped? Code for an amino acid that exists somewhere else on this wheel. But what it's suggesting is that the 3rd letter is not that important. And you can look up at the top and you can see glycine up there. 3rd letter doesn't matter. So if you get a mutation in the 3rd letter here, sometimes it's not shown in a different protein. So that's how genetic mutations can have a neutral effect on an organism. And it's pretty obvious that that a genetic mutation can have a detrimental effect on an organism. What's not so obvious is sometimes you get a letter that's different here. It might create a new protein. This is very rare, but this is how evolution works. Sometimes you get a protein that's actually better. Now the organism can run faster, digest food better, see better, fly better, have some sort of superior advantage in their environment, and then maybe eat better, have better social situation in their environment, reproduce more, and then that genetic mutation gets passed on to the offspring because it allows that organism to be more fit in its environment. And then after 50,000 generations, that's just the norm. Everyone has that because it made them all better, all these generations of offspring. That's how, and I'm going to write it up here because I think it's that important. This is how evolution occurs. As the environment changes and you have these variants in the environment, like think of humans, all of us are different. Some of us have mutations that create proteins that are better than others in a changing environment, which our environment's always changing. There's a global pandemic sometimes, there's melting ice sheets sometimes, things are always going down. So there's an assignment on this, and what I'd like you to do is also take a look at page 412 and answer these questions. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. I hope that you learned a lot about sex linked in here.